Noting the hour and the presence of a quorum, I call the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee to order. Welcome, everyone. Thank you to ActonTV for taping this meeting and providing it on their website, actontv.org. This is the part of the meeting per policy BEDH, when members of the public may speak for up to 2 minutes on items not included on this agenda. Comments regarding items on the agenda should be made during that part of the meeting. Typically, the committee administration will not respond to comments during public participation. Is there anyone that would like to speak? All right. Seeing no one, then we will move on to item 2.3, our high school student representatives update. So I'd like to welcome Michael, Rishi, and Charles up to the podium, or whoever's going to come up.
So just before our student reps start, as we're getting our microphone turned on here, we're very excited. At the beginning of a new year, we have an opportunity to welcome some of our new high school student reps. Everyone knows Michael Cheng sitting in the audience, but we're also very excited. We have 5 student reps this year: Caroline Browning, Michael Cheng, Rishi, and Rishi, I want to make sure I pronounce your name, Garish?
Yep.
All right. Justin Shan and Charles Wang are our 5 student reps this year. We're really excited to have them all here. Rishi and Charles are going to be introducing themselves a little. Maybe you can tell us just a little bit about yourself, and then you can give us your updates. So thank you, but welcome.
Hi everyone. My name is Rishi, as he mentioned earlier, and I'm a junior at ABRHS, and I'm also a school committee rep. And so I'm here to talk about the most prominent thing on most high schoolers' minds right now, which is the schedule change. And so, I mean, just to inform everyone of the student's opinion, I'd say that people think the schedule is actually decent, the rotating schedule. People are interested in it, And I mean, in the summer, I would see Instagram stories and Snapchat stories about how people are really anxious about the new schedule, and they weren't sure if they'd be able to adjust to the rotating schedule fast enough, or they'd miss time in classes. And I mean, so far from what I've seen, at least the sophomores, juniors, and seniors have been adjusting really well. And I mean, the freshmen are kind of confused. You can see them sometimes cluttering the hallways, but that is to be expected. That is to be expected from freshmen. I mean, it would happen regardless of schedule. But I'd say rotating schedule is going pretty well, except maybe the one criticism might be the lunch. And so I'd say that the lunch is sometimes slightly overcrowded, since there's only 3 lunch periods, and before there were 4. And so now everybody's cluttered in the lunchroom, and sometimes the timings are confusing. So there's only been 1 email sent out to all the students about when lunch periods are, and what section of the high school you have to be in to go to a certain lunch period. So I'd say that a lot of people don't really know where to access the information necessary to go to the proper lunch. And sometimes in class, the teachers won't even know. So they'll be looking at their books when certain bells ring. And so it's kind of mass confusion. So I mean, all in all, I'd say schedule is pretty great. It's an interesting twist to some sometimes boring high school life. But I mean, yeah, thank you.
All right. Hello, my name is Charles, and I am also currently a junior at Acton-Boxborough Regional High School. In prior years, I was a class leader, and I'm excited to begin a new chapter as a representative to the school committee. Today, I will be talking about a more recent presentation that was given, actually today. It was given by the Anti-Defamation League, otherwise known as the ADL, and they were introducing a new opportunity and club to the sophomores and juniors. And basically what they were asking for is some sophomores or juniors to sign up as peer tutors to lecture incoming freshmen about how to get rid of this hate in our school. And I think that this presentation was actually pretty key because in recent years we've seen many hate incidents occur at AB. I won't name them, but I think that informing at least the sophomores and juniors was a right step forward in taking to erase hate. I do have one criticism, and that is that instead, I've talked to some of my friends regarding signing up for this peer tutoring position, and The number one complaint that I got was that as a sophomore or a junior, they most likely will not have enough time to become a peer tutor. As Ms. McGrath and I forgot who the other. Oh, yes. Thank you, Rishi. Ms. Nugent, as Ms. Nugent and Ms. McGrath have mentioned, there is a substantial amount of time that each peer tutor needs to spend in training, and this time will actually come out of your class time. So I've heard many of my sophomore and junior friends talk about how they likely won't have enough time to partake in this particular event. I've been brainstorming, and I think a practical solution to this is to have maybe freshmen sign up as peer tutors. And I think this would be practical for two reasons. One, freshmen obviously have the most time out of all high schoolers. And two, I think that if we have freshmen signing up as peer tutors, they would have more time. They could possibly interact with the 7th and 8th graders instead of having the 10th and 11th graders interacting with the 9th graders. And I think that interacting with the 7th and 8th graders, obviously at a younger age, would be better to spread the message that we are trying to seek. I came up with an analogy, and this is that you would probably want to learn a language earlier in your life than later, just because at an earlier age you have less bias, less preconceptions about a particular topic. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, so good evening, everyone. I was talking, it's interesting, I've had some conversations over the last few days with Deb, Don, and Marie all independently, just, talking about the year and what we're working on, and we all have kind of independently come to this conclusion that we feel like we're about 3 months into the school year already with the volume of things going on and taking place, I think, between the building project and ADL and everything else that happens. And I remember looking at my calendar earlier today, and I looked and I had to pause and I said, this is only the 5th day of school. We have a lot of school year left. So it really kind of took me aback. What I was hoping to do today in the update is actually just take you a little bit through the opening day presentation that I did with our faculty. I know some of you could make it, others couldn't because of conflicts, and just give you a quick overview of some of what I talked about with our faculty. So my goal in starting off the year is always to talk about faculty and kind of frame a school year for people and set some direction to what we're trying to focus on. So I came back to a message that I gave to all of our teachers last year, and I continued to talk about as we progressed through the year, that I really had 4 key experiences that I wanted all of our students to have while they were in our schools. I believe that every student needs to feel loved, valued, be challenged, and be supported equally. And if any of those 4 things aren't present, we're really not connecting with our kids and helping them learn and thrive in our schools. So I wanted to start off with that. And I then had an opportunity to look back. You all received a copy of the annual report, hopefully at your houses. But I looked back over some of the pictures that were submitted during the process of developing the annual report, and I really looked back on those kind of key values that I wanted students to experience while they were here, and thought about just some of the pictures that I thought really summed that up. So it was an opportunity just to reflect a little bit on the year that had finished and talk about what we want for our kids and the experiences that we want them to have. This is one of my favorite photos. Just what an awesome expression. Similarly, awesome photo right there. And then this, really just takes the cake. And this photo I chose to put last because it really led into a theme that I wanted to talk about as I entered my second year here. And it was really trying to think about how can we, as an educational institution, what do we need to have as our primary habits of mind as educators in order to think about where we want to go with our kids. And ultimately, what it came down to, and I took people through a little activity here, and I'll bring you through a similar activity just so you have the opportunity. But I want you to pick a dot, and I want you to pick your favorite dot. All right, and I want you to imagine what the possibilities for that dot are. Right, and it's really kind of a mental exercise, but I think the biggest thing is sometimes that plain dot isn't just the plain dot that we're all looking at, and there can be more to it. So quick analogy, I then did something where I'm not going to bring it to you, but I actually had some photos from our annual report, and I took students' faces from those, and I backed people up, and instead of dots on a screen, I put students' faces. And really just from the idea of equating, imagining the possibilities from dots to imagining the possibilities for the students that we have in front of us. And I talked about that and the implications it has for our institutional values and institutional habits of mind. And I came up with one that I really wanted people to think about this year. And it was something that I think not only applies to our students, but to our adults as well, which is curiosity. It's certainly the foundation of all learning to take place, begins with curiosity, but as a professional habit of mind, it has to also be on the forefront of every educator's mind. How can we continue to grow ourselves? How can we continue to think more deeply about each of our students and remain curious about the kids that we're working with? So that was really the theme for the year. I then had an opportunity, and I'm going to actually be coming back to you a little bit more on this, and you can read it in the packet, but I'm not going to go into depth tonight because that would take an hour. But I will be coming back to you soon and giving you an update on progress around kind of the next district strategy or district strategic plan. But I had an opportunity to share the main key themes that had come up through my entry findings. And our leadership team actually did an exercise when we went on our retreat this summer where we took the school committee's feedback that you gave us in last year's workshop. We took our leadership team, senior leadership team's feedback in the same exact exercise, and then the assistant principal's feedback in a similar exercise, or same exercise, and we actually looked at the patterns across all three, and I'll bring those back to you as we go through. And we really came up that there were some clear themes that emerged out of all of that. And so I shared those with our faculty. Again, it's in your packet. I'm not going to talk through all of them tonight. But we then talked about how do those fit together. And that started to form kind of our next big areas of the district strategy. And we really thought of four things that we think could really help our district move forward. One is engaged learning and really thinking more deeply about how we engage students in the learning process. We wanted to talk about inclusive practices so that each student in our schools really felt that sense of being loved and valued as the individuals that they are, and we deeply know who our students are. We also want to think about not only the equitable opportunities that we've been focused on and access, but we need to push that a step further and now start talking about equitable outcomes for students. And then finally, really making sure that we're prioritizing social emotional well-being and taking as proactive an approach and a comprehensive approach to a system of social emotional supports. So those were our four key areas. We started to share them with our faculty. And then I talked to our faculty because as I developed these four key areas here on this slide, I had an epiphany one day because when I started last year, the first thing I shared with our teachers was this compass with the sense of being loved, valued, challenged, and supported. And when I came back, and we did this activity independent of the compass, but I put the compass back with this sense of what do we want to be working on, and a lot of it came together. And it was just a nice way to look back and kind of key that in. There's a lot of detail that goes behind this. These are just four kind of broad overarching themes, and I will be probably coming back to you, maybe not next meeting, but the meeting after, and doing a fairly substantial update to our planning process so that you have an opportunity to listen and talk about that. Played a little video, and I'll play this for you because I think it's a neat video.
If you wish to make curiosity from scratch, you must first invent the universe.
When I think of science, I think of a truly human activity, something fundamental to our DNA. That's what we do as human beings.
Our ancestors who were not curious, who did not go looking over the hill to see what was on the other side, disappeared.
Curiosity, in some ways, is like the opposite of judgment. You can't hate something if you're curious about it. And really, you can be curious about everything.
Our species is young and curious and brave. It shows much promise.
The more discoveries you make, the more you realize you don't know what's going on. The more you realize you don't know.
Science is all around us, and science can be not only in your mind, but in your heart.
It fills me with joy to make discoveries every day of things I had never seen before. It fills me with joy to know that we can pursue these answers.
I this disease. It has to do with curiosity. It has to do with people wondering what makes something do something. What we're looking for is how everything works. What makes everything work.
Isn't that the making of a little scientist? Curiosity, asking questions, not getting the right answer, deciding to find out for yourself, making a mistake, not giving up, and learning patience.
Curiosity. It's the most powerful thing you own. Imagination is a force that can actually manifest a reality.
Stay curious.
The California.
So what was interesting in kind of preparing that for the faculty and doing some research and reading on curiosity, I think I came across something, and I don't want to misquote the numbers, but it's approximate, that kindergartners on average ask something like 300 questions a day at that age, but yet somehow by the time students hit high school age, we're down into the teens. And that's really a travesty, because as we stop asking questions about things, we stop that learning process. And I think overall, I would like to make sure that we continue to develop a culture in our schools where asking questions becomes the norm, and not knowing the answer is also an area of comfort for everyone, because we don't have all the answers. No one does. There's no teacher that has all the answers about their students. There's no student that has all the answers. If we did, we wouldn't be in school, right? So really just kind of, how do we create that culture? So it was the start of that. We also started a little hashtag on Twitter, and so over the course of the last few days, some of our teachers have been sharing moments of curiosity that they were able to capture in the class. So I just thought I would share a little bit with you. Rather than just showing you pictures from the year, we wanted to show you pictures of curiosity as we started this school year. I love that picture on the right. And then this was actually from the assembly this morning at the high school. Curiosity looks different for kindergartners than it does for high school students. And what we were trying to pique today was curiosity in students about what it means to have an inclusive school culture. And how do we address biases. So you heard a little bit about that. There's obviously, the assembly today was the kickoff for the World of Difference program from a student standpoint, but I want to reiterate that that was an actual full year in planning in order to get to this point. We actually first made contact with ADL a year ago, August. Was our first point of contact. You have to go through an entire year of waiting to get into the program. We are part of a national research study, or at least New England research study, that's sponsored by Boston University, that actually is collecting pre- and post-implementation data on the impact that this program has on school culture and students' perception of bias. So we're really excited about being able to participate in that and see some of our data come back. This will continue throughout the fall. We presented to about 900 students today. It was all of our sophomores and juniors. We're really looking for between 20 and 30 peer leaders. So it's definitely a challenge for juniors and seniors. They're busy, but we have a large population, so we're hoping that we get a good cohort. When I've run this in program before, it was shocking because you end up typically with 3 times as many students interested as you can actually accept. So I'm excited to see kind of the student response to that as we progress. But I do want to thank the high school for all the follow-up on this. This is going to be a great program for the school. That's our hashtag. If you're interested in following that as the year progresses, hopefully it gives you, a little food for thought as we go through the year, and we'd like to keep our educators thinking about curiosity as the year goes on. We don't just want that to be a day one endeavor. And then this is just my favorite picture. It was on the annual report. It just captures this pure sense of joy. And this was a group of kindergartners at the end of last year at Blanchard Memorial School, celebrating their learning for the year. So on that, I will, quickly go through some of the rest of my update just to give you some more informational activity, but I wanted to at least give you a sense of what we are talking about with our faculty when we talk with them at the beginning of the school year. On a little bit, I want you to control your excitement over the next topic after that, but we're going to transition to a quick transportation update. I am pleased to announce that we've actually had very smooth transportation over the first 5 days of school, especially relative to last year when we were very disruptive in our transportation system. Very positive feedback around the Here Comes the Bus app, and being able to finally roll that out after kind of a year worth of waiting period. So we're off and running there. I was able to follow up with the principals at McCarthy Town, Miriam, and Conant. If you remember, we added 2 buses during the budget process last year. We also are now rerouting the high school buses because they drop at the high school first, and so they start at the high school, then go to charter. That also gives a little bit more time for buses to get to the elementary stops. And so all of the issues we had, particularly at Conant last year, with students arriving as many as 10 minutes late, have been fully resolved at this point. So he reported that every day since the beginning of school, he's had all his students in the building on time and ready to go. So we're excited about that. Building project update, we continue to make progress. You're going to hear a lot more about that, but I just wanted to highlight 2 key things for you. One is that last night the building committee did authorize Skanska, who is our owner's project manager, to submit our schematic design package to the MSBA for board approval. We anticipate receiving comments back from MSBA in the coming weeks and are tentatively scheduled onto the October 30th board meeting. That is the board meeting that will provide us final approval for the project and provide the clearest picture of exactly what our reimbursable costs are. Everything will be set at that meeting. So more to come there. And you'll hear a lot more about that later tonight. And then also at the August 28th meeting, the building committee also voted the final project budget not to exceed $117.5 million. There's 5 more digits of detail after that don't need to be in this update. You'll hear it later. But we're really pleased that the final budget did come in below the initial cost projections of $120 to $130 million. You'll hear more about how we achieved that as a building committee later. And then we're also updating the building project website with all of that cost information, as well as some of the positive and favorable information we have with regard to the estimated costs for taxpayers, which you will hear more about later. And then the final update, we are moving. I know you're enjoying that we're not sitting in the same wooden chairs as we have for the last couple of years. Junior high library did get new furniture that's more student focused, but we also are awaiting our final transition over to the administration building. We are still anticipating that for the October 3rd meeting. We're on schedule with that work, but we will update you more if there's any type of delay because it's a very tight schedule to get to that point, but things are progressing well and we're on target. So with that, sorry for the long update, but it's that first time of school. I do want to have both Deb and Dawn just talk to you for a couple of minutes about some of their work. Deb is going to give us a little update on summer professional learning, and then Dawn is going to talk a little bit about her work in her new role, as the Assistant Superintendent for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and some of the work she's doing early on a blog. So who wants to go first? It's up to you.
Okay. So a few highlights for summer professional learning that I want to bring to your attention in the memo. So a lot of work happened on campus here. About 26 R&Ds took place. So that translates to about 1,854 hours that were invested by our educators over the summer. About the cost of about $45,000. There's a line item in my budget to support that work. But our contract also allows our teachers to earn in-service credit as well as PDPs. And so hard to quantify over time what that means in terms of dollars and cents around the in-service credit, but there are 2 different ways that our educators are compensated around that. The R&D process starts in the spring. Teachers are able to make proposals. It goes through several different layers of approval before it reaches a committee. Dawn and I sit together on that committee with educators and a building administrator to evaluate those R&D proposals. Each one of them comes with a measure that can evaluate the impact on student learning or on whatever problem was identified. So various different measures and tools are used, like surveys, actually looking at student assessments, exit tickets, observations, all kinds of things. So there are mechanisms in place to evaluate the the work and to make sure that the work has an impact on our students and their learning for the future. A couple of other things that I want to just bring your attention to in the memo. This is the second year in a row that we had a group of educators attend the Mass General Hospital workshop entitled Closing the Literacy Gap in Elementary Education, the Science of Language and Literacy, and it's facilitated by Dr. Joanna Christodoulou, as well as someone else, Tiffany Hogan. And this is really wonderful because of the new brain research that's now available for us to really understand the need for universal screening for dyslexia. And so what I'm really excited to share with you is that Dr. Christodoulou is going to come and spend a good portion of our kindergarten grade level meeting with our kindergarten teachers on October 1st, so that all of our teachers can also hear firsthand the science behind all of this. And so we're really thrilled to be able to welcome her to Acton-Boxborough in early October. I have heard many of our educators, once they have found out that all of you participated in the C training, just how incredibly pleased and excited they were to hear that you also are participating in this. So just know that it means a lot to them that you went through the same training that they are expected to go through as well. And then the last thing I want to bring your attention to is the Ignite AB Summer Tech Camp. This was really well received. Over 60 educators participated this summer. And as we look down on page 4, Ignite, when they were spelling out each one of those letters, the N was for nourish curiosity, and that was even before Peter came up with his AB curiosity hashtag, so good minds thinking alike there. But this was really terrific because it was also a way to expose a lot of our junior high educators before the one-to-one initiative took place in September, and so really building their repertoire of tools and things that they can engage our students in their learning. So those are just a few of the highlights for the summer work.
You just mentioned a program, second-year program with Masters General Hospital, right? So is it like early screening?
So it's a workshop. So the two professors, the two doctors were sharing the cognitive science behind the need to do universal screening. They themselves are developing some universal screening tools, and some of them are becoming available just now. We were hoping to get into the beta pilot for one, actually with Dr. Gabb, which is at a different, she's at Harvard. We weren't able to do that one, but we're learning about all different types of tools that are being developed based on the research that they're doing. So important for our teachers to hear the cognitive research that's happening.
Thank you for the description of the R&D programs. I had two questions related to your comments. One was, what percentage of proposals are accepted? And then you also touched on the fact that there were mechanisms to look at student outcomes. And I was wondering, is that a required element of the proposal process? And maybe not right now, but in some forum, could you illustrate that for a couple of the things that you highlighted in the packet?
So because there are a couple of layers before it even gets to us as a committee, we're not exactly sure how many are necessarily negated or not accepted to even go through the next level of acceptance. This year, I think we rejected about 7 R&Ds. So there were 26, there were 32, so 7 of them were rejected because they didn't quite meet the criteria that we had established for approval. The measures have to be explained in the proposal. So those bullets, all of those components are part of the proposal process. So we have a template that needs to be completed as part of that process. So yes, in fact, we do know what the measure is going to be ahead of time. So for example, I think the electronic music course, I think she's asking for students, she's going to be surveying students around their learning of electronic music, and they're just really this is the first time through, so what kinds of things can be changed, what kind of iterative changes can she make to the course. Do you know what the BCBA one is? I'm just trying off the top of my head.
Yes, so our BCBAs all got together and did one for the ABA trainers that work with them. So the independence facilitators, paraprofessionals, we're trying to really intentionally work with them to get them the training that they need to make sure to support students. And so they do a pre and a post. So before they do the workshops, they have 3 or 4 that they developed through this work. And so by the end of the year, after they've run through some of them, they'll have the pre and the post for us to be able to show staff learning and growth as well. So some of it's student-focused, some of it's staff-focused.
I think the same for the math and the science. I know for all the investigations, every science investigation has a student assessment attached to it. And so this alternate pathway, I would assume, had to have the same thing, an assessment of some sort for the end of that investigation to show student learning, to demonstrate. Yep.
So in the packets, there is...
Can I ask just a quick question about the funding? I mean, is this both grant funded and, is it all grant funded? Is some of it grant funded? Yeah, the professional development in the summer.
Yeah, so, there's a budget line item in my budget for R&Ds. Yeah, about 45, funds between $40,000 and $45,000. But again, not every educator asks for to be paid. Some ask for in lieu of in-service credits. So you can either be paid or you can receive in-service credits. So that's where it's hard to quantify it down the line.
Diane, you're asking about all of the professional development, not just the R&Ds, yes? No.
I'm asking about, all of it, yeah.
Oh.
Not just the research
Oh,
and
right.
development.
It can also be grant funded. Use the Title IIA grant funds quite a bit of our professional learning, as well as the budget. So it can come from a couple of different places, yeah.
So in your packets, I'm not sure what page it is. I think it starts on page 32 in the PDF packet. One of the things that I've been missing since I finished my doctorate 4 years ago is writing, and I have not had an opportunity to do it as much as I wanted. So as Peter and I were talking about this new position and what it might mean, I said, I think I really want to start writing more and blogging a little bit. So my goal is for this not to turn into the weekly newsletter that becomes the monthly newsletter that becomes a quarterly newsletter. So I'm asking people around me to hold me accountable for it. But the first piece was really about the quote is, "Do it afraid there is no manual," which I just love because that really summarizes so much of our work around this, and how difficult it is to sort of embrace uncertainty and be vulnerable in a community that has really high expectations for each and every one of us that serve our students and the community. So the goal of the blog over time is going to be to connect with not only our staff members, so from the bus drivers that are the very first face that kids see in the morning and the last that they see in the afternoon as they leave us, to each one of us, and as well as the broader community around issues pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, so far I've done 2 entries, and this is the first one.
I just wanted to come back to the seed program that the school committee did at the beginning of the year, and tie that together with this discussion of curiosity, because one of the early slides in that presentation shows a pie chart, and the biggest section of that pie chart is what I don't know that I don't know.
DK.
And I think that's fabulous. So I hope all the students, that are sitting here with us tonight recognize the vast ignorance that exists at this table.
So this is like just do it afraid. So it's like a concept. It's like are we gonna implement this? I'm just kind of see how this is gonna impact the student life or the school.
Are you referring to just the quote?
This is what we're trying to. Is it like a concept that we're trying to implement in the school district, or this is like a?
My title, the blog. I'm just trying to understand your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's also I'm trying to understand. Are we trying to introduce this one, the concept to the school district, or are we just? It's like a philosophical?
I think you mean the "Do It Afraid" quote.
Oh, that quote. Thank you. That's just for that particular quote for me resonated just in terms of thinking about this is a brand new position. We're sort of working through what that's going to mean. Yeah. And so sort of putting myself out there in a vulnerable way to say to all of our community, like, I'm not really sure what the job entails, but we'll figure it out. We're going to do this together. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also want to revisit this topic because that code you had raised a alert to me actually, which is because you mentioned that you talked to the many educators, right? They taught you that they kind of were afraid of making the mistakes, right? So and then you use this code, right? So but it raised alert to me because I believe that the school is not a test lab. It's kind of a production environment. So anything you do or any mistake you make, it could have a big impact. Some impacts are, maybe you can redo, you can fix it. Some you cannot. So I would hope that, I also understand that, we want to make some some progress or implement some new ideas, new things. But I would hope that, we could do enough impact analysis before we really, implement some new ideas.
Don, I was wondering if you were leaning toward a definition of these things or not. Are you just going to kind of let it happen over time, or because
DEI?
That's
there blog 3. It's almost done.
Oh, what was that?
I said that's blog 3. It's almost done.
Blog 3. Stay tuned. Okay.
So when I saw the quote in the packet, it kind of resonated with me because if it's any consolation, it's how I spent my day today. So good luck.
Thank you, Don and Deb, for your updates. So, you want to introduce them?
Sure.
Okay, so next up we have architect Larry Spang from Arrow Street and Mary Rowland, chair of the school building committee, to give us some updates and additional information about the progress and design of the new schools and updated information about costs and timelines.
So we're going to actually do this presentation in two parts so that you have an opportunity to ask questions in between. The first part Larry's going to lead, which is really around the architecture of the building and updating you about design, because you really haven't had an opportunity as a committee to hear about the design of the school and what's going into it from that standpoint. We're going to then pause, have an opportunity for some questions of Larry, and then I'll actually take us through some of the financials related to the building project and talk you through how the numbers come together and what they mean. And then a second opportunity to ask questions about the financial side, but we didn't want to skimp on the architecture because that's important.
Great. And I think I'll need the, there we go. And there's probably a,
I'm not sure if I have this on.
Hold on 1 second. Yeah, that should work.
Is there a pointer? Maybe, maybe not.
I don't think that pointer's working, sorry.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks very much. I'm Larry Spang from Arrow Street, and we've been very pleased to be working with the district, Peter and his staff, members of the faculty. We've met with some of the students and have been working for about a year now as we looked back on our calendars. And it's been an exciting time for us. This, as Peter mentioned, we are finishing up what is called schematic design. We did a feasibility study in schematic design really to figure out what we want to build. As Peter mentioned, we are submitting that actually is next week. The Mass School Building Authority, MSBA, does a review of that. They give us back comments. We go through a sort of a back and forth process, which we hope will culminate on the 30th of October when their board will get together and hopefully approve our project to move forward. the period between now, just to think about it for a minute, and then we'll show in a little more detail the schedule looking ahead. But between now and December is a little quiet time for the design work as you folks in town consider the project and prepare for the vote that is coming up in December. So that's sort of where we are. I do want to say that we have developed, thank you. We have developed a set of plans, some initial sketches of what things will look like. We're very much in the early stages of the work, so there's a lot of work that will go on starting, let's say, in January, which is finalizing the design of the spaces. We'll be working carefully with the faculty, the administration, the community to understand exactly how the building is going to come together. So what you will see is probably a hint at what the final building will be, but certainly you should expect changes from tonight's show. So if we have this right, and I think we've been in front of the school committee a couple of times, but I'm going to walk things through a little bit thoroughly, try and go quickly, so that everybody's kind of seeing the same thing, and then, as Peter mentioned, we'll pause for questions or comments and hear your thoughts. Again, the site, let's see if I can, oh, there we go. Is that going to work? No? Okay, so this is the site of the building. The first part of our study was looking at the gate site, which is the building, that's the Gates School, the playground or playing fields in the foreground. We're kind of hovering in this view over the Douglas School and the Douglas site, and we also looked at the Conant site. So we went through that exercise in conjunction with all those studies, and we did quite a lot of studies. The best site for us, and let's make sure this changes. Okay, try this one. Peter, you were using this one, so it's got to be that one, right? Would you like to push me? You just hit next. We'll do it the old-fashioned way. So as you can see from this drawing, and we won't rehash some of the work that was done a while back, despite the fact that the Douglas Gate site is actually quite large, the buildable area is quite small given all the wetlands, the brook, the constraints there too. So in essence, what we're doing is proposing a building that would be built immediately adjacent to the Gates School. We will keep the gates in operation during that period. There's some phasing work that has to be done once we have a contractor on board. But essentially that will happen when that is done. You want to do next? The site will look like this. So the new school will be located essentially at the center of the existing gate site. There will be a parking lot immediately to the west of the building, some traffic flows we can walk through. And then the Douglas site, the building will be removed, and it will be converted both to support the parking necessary for the entire building project, as well as a multi-use field as well. And we're going to rebuild the bridge connection that connects the two. Next, please. And this is, sorry, it's not reading well at this scale, but giving you a little detail of the site features. Again, one of the things that we're excited about is the opportunity to use the space between the building and the wetlands as a learning environment for the students. Our landscape architect, Tara Inc., who has been great working with us as part of the team, has identified the idea of the 3 levels of playgrounds: the puddles for the smallest kids, the springs for the middle kids, and the rivers for the older kids, and sort of having 3 levels of play space, in addition to other sort of mixed use and multi-purpose learning environment around the building and helping to root the students into the natural environment, of which is such a great asset. Next. The building has come together, as you're well aware, 2 twin schools, Gates and Douglas. The Douglas School will be on the top floor, so it'll be a 3-floor building. Douglas School on the top floor, Gates School in the middle floor, and the shared activities, the gym, the cafeteria, things like that on the ground floor, with the preschool activities, and we'll go through that in a little bit of detail in a second. But just think about it that way. So you would come into the building in a sort of shared environment, move upstairs to Gates, and then upstairs again to Douglas. Next floor. The ground floor plan, again, is sort of an L shape with the cafeteria around the back side of the building. In the particular case, and we'll go through it in a little more detail, the preschool is located to the upper part of the screen. There's about 9 classrooms, 1 special ed classroom, 8 general ed classrooms for preschool, with its own entrance, such that the students and the families coming into preschool would have their own opportunity to come in that way. In the middle is the Learning Commons, and I'll pause there and I'll show you a little more detailed plan to go through that. Gymnasium, a full-size gym plus essentially a half-size gym for the smaller students, what we're calling the health and wellness gym. Cafeteria in the back, kitchen, and associated support spaces on the ground floor. If you go to the next. Second floor, again, is the Gates School. So starting on the upper part of the screen there is kindergarten, first grade classrooms, rolling around second, third grade, fourth grade, fifth, and sixth, coming across the horizontal bar here. There is a music and art room that is shared sort of at the center of space, those green classrooms. The media center, what we all think of as the library, but the media center is a 2-story volume that will connect the 2 schools, so the 2 schools will essentially be able to feel like they are fronting onto the library, and we thought that was a nice and important move to feel like it's integral to both schools' activities. If you go to the next, the Douglas School on the 3rd floor essentially is a repeat of the 2nd floor with a little different configuration of the library, but otherwise essentially the same. This is a blow-up of that preschool area. As you can see, we have a robust program of classroom and support spaces, again, to bring together the youngest members of the community, and has a little bit of a privacy and a little bit of a separated feel, such that it won't feel like they have older students marching through their space. If you go to the next one. This shows that area of the ground floor. We did want to point out the Learning Commons, and Peter, I do appreciate the inspiration you gave us about the way to think about the students. We really like those ideas. We love the idea that this building will be a space for all those activities that Peter was talking about earlier to come together. The Learning Commons we see is a particularly interesting area. It is, in our minds, a flexible use area. It has some built-in raised seating around the edge, but otherwise is intended to provide a multi-use space, whether it's a class who's out doing interesting activities, whether it's a grade level group or several class grade levels. We think it's a really dynamic space that's going to contribute to the environment of curiosity you're trying to create. We are creating 2 STEAM labs, one for each school, but down here on the lowest level, both to bring about their importance and allow them to use this Learning Commons. Those are those blue spaces. We also have a multi-purpose art, music spaces, again, to create some really exciting learning as you walk in the door and see things. The cafeterias in the back will be a multi-purpose space, cafetorium really. There will be a more traditional proscenium stage on the right. We label it platform, and that's for code purposes, but it really is a stage. And on the left, a little more of an open and flexible space, again, to give flexibility and use of space. And the gym, 2 gym spaces have their own entry, the idea of there being nights and weekends that can be closed off, and you can have activities there leading up and through and into the cafeteria, so that the event, you can do multiple things in that space. If you go to the next. A couple of, as I say, sketch views, trying to understand what the building might look like or begin to look like. Again, we have a lot of work to do, and we'll be bringing back a lot of more images to show you. This is trying to convey the sense of visibility that the administration, the principals are very interested in, the sense of learning going back and forth between the classroom and the public spaces. If you go to the next. We've started to identify a mixed-use space at the front of the classroom, essentially where all the cubbies and backpacks and the sinks and the other things can happen in a way that sort of allows that to have its own space. And if you go to the next one, This is a view of sort of a typical classroom where the learning is really concentrated. Again, these are very initial sketches, and we'll be doing a lot of work with the team to develop those further in the next round. On the outside of the building, if you go to the next, yes, we're trying to balance a couple of things, keep it efficient and cost-effective to build. Straightforward, it is going to be a relatively tall building. It's also a relatively large building, particularly for the Acton environment. So we're trying to bring it down. We're trying to build in aspects of the historical context. We spent a little time driving around Acton and Boxborough trying to understand the context of the area and work with some of that. You can see sort of wider windows here at the front near the school buses. Those are the art and music rooms, trying to bring light into those spaces. And then classrooms going back towards the left is the preschool. If you go to the next slide. This is another shot as you would be entering the space. We're trying to create, you'll see in a minute, this is a bus area, so the buses at drop-off and pickup would use this space in front of the building to turn around, but during the rest of the day, we'd like it to be open for students to use so it feels like you're not surrounded by parking. The front door there in the middle would be where the students can enter either from cars or from buses. Oops, sorry, Mary, next. And again, a slightly different view looking down the street from Spruce Street. Next. This may be a little hard to read from where you are, but essentially we're trying to use the existing way that the site circulates so we're not creating more impact on the neighborhood. Coming in off of the existing driveway, opening the buses, coming in on the red, coming around in front of the building, dropping students there, as I mentioned, doing a loop move to come in and come out again, again, so that we're bringing buses in and bringing them out as they are doing today. Families, visitors, teachers coming in down Spruce Street, coming around, doing a drop-off in front of the school where you see it says preschool entrance, and then circulating around and coming back out. We are anticipating some amount of folks would like to drop the students off and or park in the Douglas site, so we've set up a little bit of a drop-off area there. Families can park there and walk down across the bridge, the boardwalk, or you might drop off your older students and allow them to walk down and connect to the building. We are trying to create a back door, so to speak, that would be welcoming to those students. If you go to the next one. And as I mentioned, this is more or less the project schedule we've gone through over the course of the last year, a lot of planning, programming, developing the scheme to where it is today. As this mentions, we are submitting next week our schematic design report to the MSBA in the goal that on the 30th of October, their board will vote approval for the project, and we will then move forward, and you will have your vote in December. The goal is in the summer of next year, which is actually a pretty tight timeline, if all things align, that we would do some enabling work, which would allow us to start construction shortly thereafter of the building. So there's a little bit of work that's involved with the site to get it ready for the main construction, but more or less targeting summer of 2022. So essentially 3 years, we would be opening the building, and then there's some time to complete the site work because we would then have to take down the existing Gates building, the existing Douglas building, create the parking lots, finish up that kind of work. So that's the overall timeline, and I think we'll stop here. Take questions, comments, concerns, all of that, and then Peter will carry on with the financial discussion.
I'm not sure if this is a question that, it's for you or for Mary, but generally for the building subcommittee. One thing, caught my eyes is that, for the eligible cost, we have the reimbursement rate as high as 49-something%. But when we, go to the total cost, and then when we look at the effective reimbursement rate, it's only 34-something. a little bit slight higher at 34%. It's even shy from, the lower end we gave when we promote this project to the community at the very beginning. So at that, the range we gave at the very beginning was from 35% to 45 or something. So 34 is even shy from 35. So that just means one thing is that, ineligible costs, we try to stretch as much as possible. And I want to know, are they necessary? I mean, all the costs fall into this ineligible cost. Are they really necessary? Are we building a luxury school or are we building a functioning school?
Michael? Peter is going to address some of those, all the financial stuff when he does his piece. So if we can just limit the questions right now to things that have to do with the presentation we just saw.
You talked about some of the design elements in the schematic design that will be submitted to MSBA. Could you talk about what decisions will remain, post that schematic decision, and what kind of things, although they're laid out a certain way for the schematic design, could in fact still be altered as you go through the construction phase?
Sure. So again, the way we think about a project, there's several phases. The way the industry is structured, schematic design is sort of the beginning. You might think of that as 25% of the effort. Design development is the next phase we would jump into in January. That is taking the schematic plans and really pushing them to understand the building. Then there's called construction documents. That's when we really develop as much of the detailing as we possibly can to create a set of drawings for the contractor to build from. And then, of course, there's construction. So typically what the MSBA wants to see is that our program is essentially set so that our spaces are determined, and the spaces really have been determined by the educational needs of the schools. And so that is then essentially fixed. What I tell my staff is, thou shalt not change the spaces in the building because they are really set with us and the MSBA. The look and feel of things, there will be some amount of push and pull as we go through. There certainly is a lot of time spent working through the costs of some of these things. For instance, I know we've talked about, and we'll be jumping in on how much glass we actually have between the hallways and the classrooms. Glass is an expensive item, so we want to be careful and cautious about how we use it and how we spend our dollars there. So essentially, we think the plans will be pretty much the same as what you see today. The building massing would certainly be about the same as what you see today. The interior fit and finishes might be a little different. In general, maybe about the same. The outside look is probably going to go through a little bit, but we're sort of hoping that that's kind of where people are happy with it. So I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question.
So you mentioned the walkway between the parking area and the building, embellishments. Can you just elaborate on what those embellishments might look like?
Embellishments, I'm not sure.
Upgrades or you mentioned something about the walkway.
Oh, so the walkway, what we are anticipating is replacing it, and essentially that's from a functional standpoint. The connection between the two, we have to do a little bit of work. As you see, it's sort of wrapping onto the Douglas site to make sure it's handicap accessible. But more or less, it's sort of consistent with what you see out there today. The bridge itself is a little bit ad hoc, and so we would replace that. But it's essentially allowing us to say that that parking on that side is part of the project because it fulfills our overall parking needs. Yes, of course.
So a couple things that are also important. One, we need that to be plowable by a small machine, so we're going to actually be widening that walkway. And then the other thing that likely we're doing is covering it as well to protect people using it from the weather, because we know it's going to be an active site.
couple of questions. You showed us a slide with a flexible space
Mhm.
where the cubbies are usually located. And I was wondering what other design elements support kind of 21st century learning in flexible space, like are classrooms connected in any way? Or are there other elements that you've built in that reflect kind of future
Sure,
oriented learning?
sure. Yeah, if you want to go back, Mary, to the plan. Just one of the classroom plans. One more, there we are. So what you can see, and I'm sorry, I'll try and point without losing the mic. But between each classroom, there's sort of two things. There's small breakout groups. If you see here on the lower right side, you'll see 2 6th grade classrooms. It's the Learning Center, speech and language. So those are spaces for students to be pulled out and given special tutoring, attention, needs, group working, that kind of thing. There's also a breakout space. There's a little box sort of on the outside wall. Again, that's an idea that there's a small space within and shared by 2 of the classrooms that they would come in and be able to use those spaces. We have similar type spaces anticipated for the Media Center. And again, the main space down on the first floor, again, is seen as this kind of open and accessible learning space. So there's a number of pieces around the building that are intended to really support that and give teachers the flexibility of learning.
Can I ask one more? Okay. Does the building design still support a net zero objective for the project?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
That's a simple one. Yes, so let me just elaborate on that. We are still targeting net zero energy. We are working very hard to figure out how much energy we're going to use. We're working with the schools themselves, and particularly in the next phase of the work, to try and understand how they operate the building. Because what we know is as the building becomes more and more efficient, it really becomes the users who contribute more energy use. So we want to work with them to understand that, as well as how much energy we can actually generate through photovoltaic on the roof and across the parking lot. That will not be part of the project, but will be a separate piece put together by solar energy providers, essentially similar to what else you've done in town. We are also working, trying to get net zero water. So using as much water as we can that's pulled off the roof to do things like flush toilets and other things in ways that then cut down our water use and keep the water essentially at net zero. And as well as net zero waste, although really a lot of that is operational, but some of that is built into the how the building gets built, the new building, and how the old buildings get torn down and recycled.
Charles, do you have a question? Can you come up to the mic just so that...
So I believe that you had mentioned that the media center was, like one of the goals of the media center was to have it like as a shared space between the Gates and the Douglas schools. I was interested in what features, like design-wise, you are planning to implement in order to achieve this goal.
Okay. So let me steal the mic back again. Yep. So the Media Center has probably a ways to go in terms of our thinking about it. Or one of our immediate steps is to get together with the librarians and understand their goals for the space. Essentially what we're imagining is the ground floor has a little bit more of a traditional library feel, much like you have here, with stacks, work areas, group spaces, and so forth. The upper floor having a little more of a breakout space feel, a little bit more of places where students can come and work together. We certainly see it as a place where the 2 schools will come together, and so thematically, how that works is yet to be developed, but that's an important goal. And lastly, we're working hard to give that a really nice view out to the wetlands and to the natural environment, again, to connect that to the center of the building. So there's a lot of work in that particular area to go, but we are excited about the possibility of making a really interesting space.
I would
would recommend folding in the librarians at the Parker Damon building.
Yes.
Okay.
I was hoping you could comment on the importance of the composition of the building subcommittee in reaching the schematic design from a process perspective, because as Peter noted earlier, the building subcommittee is the one that's actually approved the schematic design that we're going forward. That building subcommittee, there are school committee representatives, but there are representatives from the Board of Selectmen, there are representatives from the Finance Committee, and as you've seen that process play out, why is it important that it's that group that's approving the schematic design?
Well, let's see. So, first of all, I'll say it's been great working with that group. As you've mentioned, there is I think, a good cross-section of the folks who are really involved with the project, both from the administration level, the faculty level, school committee, selectmen, et cetera. It's been a really good group. They've held us to task pretty well, asking a lot of tough questions, making sure they understand things from their various perspectives. And I do think building is it's an endeavor by a community. As a group, you are trying to create this new place, and as a group, you all have different ideas of what's important, what's less important. So hearing that diverse set of voices coming together for us has been good. I believe the Mass School Building Authority, MSBA, requires the school building committee and requires certain participation. So from that standpoint, we're sort of, that is what it is, but it has been a really nice process for us.
You mentioned using the outdoor space, the wetlands in the area around the school as part of one of the assets that the school has. And I know you talked about the bridge so that kids can walk over to school from the drop-off. Is there an outdoor sort of nature's classroom space that's part of your design, or do you know if there are plans for that?
Yeah, let's see. We have several different things going on, and I just want to point out, so, okay, we'll try it this way. So right about in here, so we see this, there's sort of a bit of a slot that is between, sorry. There's a bit of a slot between the cafeteria and the main classroom wing that we're trying to use as sort of a piece pulling students in from Douglas. We're seeing that as, excuse me, a smaller classroom, outdoor classroom, as you're saying. There's actually a larger amphitheater planned. As part of that, we're planning a walking trail that would have sort of mile markers that would allow you to kind of walk the site and understand that. We're also trying to incorporate walking trails for the public in ways that don't feel threatening to the school or vice versa. And so we're really seeing, and again, this is a bit at the conceptual level, but we're really seeing and excited by the idea that the building really embraces the natural environment.
Thank you. All right, so Peter, do you want to move on?
Yeah. Well, that was the fun stuff, now the hard part.
Thank you so much for all those slides and for explaining a lot of the things that we haven't had the chance to see yet.
Does it?
So I now know my next career as a pointer. So I want to talk a little bit about the finances of this, and this is going to be a little bit more nitty-gritty, detail-oriented, but we think it's really important for you to understand it so that as you get questions in the community, you have the right information at your disposal. We want to start with, why was this an important project for us, and how did we really save the district money in both of the communities? It really starts with probably the first decision that went into this, which is this idea of consolidating 3 different schools, because it really is a consolidation of 3 schools into one building. As we did the feasibility study, one of the charges of the architect is actually to study a whole variety of options, and I think there were 14 or 15 different options that ended up getting studied. Because this is technically the C.T. Douglas building project, the first is to study the options around C.T. Douglas, whether or not that was could be renovated and saved, or whether it needed replacement. Ultimately, renovation was not going to be cost effective, but to replace the C.T. Douglas Elementary School only, the cost estimate that came back was $99 million for one building. The final budget that was voted on August 28th by the building committee for all three of these schools to go into one building was $117.5 million. I can't really put an exact figure to what that is, but you can do the math in terms of that's clearly the biggest piece of cost savings for both of our communities. The second area where we saved cost, one of the options when we had determined that it was going to be a Gates Douglas school was to either build the school in one phase, which means the entire school gets built and then students move in, or to build it in two phases where you'd build half of the new school, then tear down the existing gates, and then construct the other half of the school. We opted to build it in one phase for two reasons. One, it saved $7 million in costs right there, and it also saved 15 months of construction time for our students. And when we talk about the level of disruption to students who have to undergo that, that's a really significant amount of learning time for kids in elementary school. Finally, the big element was the building committee, once we got the initial cost estimates back, went through a process called value engineering, where you look at cost savings ways to build the same school in a more cost-effective manner. And the building committee identified $3.5 million worth of additional savings that we opted for. So right there, we're hoping to be able to communicate with people that this was about making sure that we had a high value for the investment we're asking the community to make. There is an additional cost to building a twin school, and that really comes with administration spaces, and we want to be clear about that. MSBA guidelines, the way they work, we're building one building. They don't see us as building three schools, we're building one building. And if we build one building, there's a certain space allotment in square feet that we get for administration space. And all of the different types of spaces within the building. But one of the big areas that we struggled with was administration space, because if we want to preserve the unique identities of the Douglas Gates and preschool buildings and not have a school of 1,000 elementary school students, which is wholly inappropriate by community standards based on all the survey feedback we got, but it's just educationally inappropriate as well, that to build that large of an elementary school, then we needed three separate administrations to make sure that that school felt small, similar to all of the other schools that we have in Acton and Boxborough. In order to do that, we needed additional administrative space over the guidelines, and we know that that's about 3,000 square feet. It's maybe 15 square feet more than that, but I thought 3,000 was close enough for tonight. That is a cost of about $1 million, almost $2 million. It's $1.8 million. So we know that that's a cost that we incur for doing business by combining these schools into a twin school, but we also want to make sure that we're clear about the level of cost savings that come from that same process of combining schools. High-level cost-saving strategies that the building committee engaged in. The initial cost estimates that came back to the building committee on August 6th, and what I can say is when we do cost estimates for a building project like this, there are two independent sets of cost estimators that get engaged. The architect has a consultant as one cost estimator, and then the owner's project manager, which is Skanska, has its own independent cost estimator. That process is required by the MSBA. They look at everything from how much concrete is being poured, what are the specifications around concrete, how many steel bolts, what type of steel needs to be used in the building, how many windows, what are the size of the windows, and they get that granular in their analysis of the construction in order to come up with that cost estimate. But the original cost estimate that came in that was reconciled between the two was $124,500,000, and you can see the detailed numbers. Between August 6th and August 30th, the building committee as well as the administration and Arrow Street and Skanska engaged in what's called the value engineering process, where we look for ways to design a school that we still believe is highly effective for our students, but do it in an economical way. And we identified $3.5 million that in savings, and I'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in a bit. In addition, we looked at construction contingencies historically for building projects that are currently in the works, and we did not need to carry, and this is based on a recommendation from our project manager, we didn't need to carry 4%. That was just excessive for this project, and the project manager recommended we reduce that to 2.5%. That saved another $1.5 million. We also reduced the owner's contingency from 1.5 to 1%. The difference between a construction contingency and an owner's contingency. A construction contingency is designed for unforeseen things that happen during the construction process. There's a mistake on a drawing that obviously can't be built that way and has to be correct when the contractor does it. That comes out of the construction contingency. If we as a district decide that we want to add something to the project that didn't get designed because we think it's a great idea and we just overlooked it, that would be an owner's contingency. So that was reduced from 1.5 to 1% at a savings of about $600,000. Finally, we've been working with our OPM and architect to negotiate their costs moving forward, and we were able to save about $1 million through that process as well on the total design of the building. And so that led to our final voted project budget of $117.8 million. This, I'll just let you read this. This is not there for you to read. It's in your packet, and it's available online on the building project information. This is the actual copy of the value engineering list that was voted by the committee. This includes 43 individual items that were value engineered out of that to the tune of $3.5 million. I'm going to go through a high-level look at that so you have a sense of what was removed from this project. We reduced the scope of the landscaping, and this included multiple items. It didn't include things that students are going to notice. We realized that we could either build 100 feet of concrete wall that was permanent that students could sit on, or we could buy benches that students could sit on and have those across the site. We chose to go with a mix. So there are some concrete benches. There's also some benches that we'll just purchase through the furniture piece of the budget. That was about $600,000 in savings. We reduced the size of the cafeteria, but were able to preserve our second stage, and that made the entire cafeteria and stage area reimbursable. It also allows us to use that second stage for additional cafeteria seating as more of a platform, and that was something that both the administration and building committee felt very comfortable with. There was terrazzo flooring at the entrance of the school, which can be beautiful flooring, but there's really only about 2 installers left in the Northeast that do terrazzo. It's extraordinarily expensive when you can have a very nice linoleum floor that provides a beautiful entrance to your school. So that saved another $340,000. We decided that we couldn't pursue the green roof. We wanted to do that, but it certainly didn't come out in the highest of all the priorities that we wanted over the cafeteria. It looks nice from the second and third floors, and it would be a nice learning opportunity for kids, but it was something that we decided to value engineer out of this process. The roof over the caf will be green roof ready, so that we can come back later with grant monies or money that we do through fundraising and install a green roof through community resources at a later date. We also opted to go with a hybrid geothermal for mechanical platform. That's the heating system and cooling system for the school. We realized that we could do a hybrid system that actually used electric boilers, so we still have no combustion for this school, so there'll be no gas lines to the school. It's a combustion-free school. And if you're reading a lot in the news, the state is moving in the same direction with its buildings. That's really the next wave. We wanted to preserve that. But by going with a hybrid system with electric boilers and a combination of geothermal wells, we were able to reduce the number of geothermal wells, save a considerable amount of money by doing that, and have electric boilers that on the coldest days could actually supplement some of the geothermal heat. That saved $250,000, that was about $300,000. We changed, there was a very kind of specific designer block on the outside of the school that looked beautiful, but we could replicate, 85-90% of that look by going to a standard brick, which comes in a variety of colors and that can meet our needs. $250,000. And now you can see the numbers, but we also, we wanted to try to put radiant flooring in the preschool classrooms as a supplement because we know that sometimes the teachers and kids are spending a lot of time on the floors. we weren't able to do it in this project. They still have wonderful heating system in classrooms, and they will be very comfortable in this building. But it was something we wanted to try and pursue. We could not continue that. In the restrooms, oftentimes you'll see tile in restrooms when you go in. Actually, our operations director, JD, is not a big fan of tile in restrooms with young kids because the grout can actually absorb things that can smell over time, but yet we chose to value engineer that with a FRP or fiberglass reinforced panel. It can look very nice. We're actually having the architects look at options for that, but that was a significant cost savings. We reduced the amount of glass on the exterior of the building by 5%. It ended up coming out of places. There's some drawings online on the building project website that people can access. It came out of places that people will not really notice that level of reduction, but that could still save us a significant amount of money. A lot of the corridor ceilings in the original drawings had drywall for corridor ceilings. By going to acoustic tile, like what you see in all of our other schools, that was a savings over $100,000. We looked at the rainwater harvesting tank for our net zero water goals. The original rainwater harvesting tank was designed to carry 99% of the capacity. So in other words, we would be a net zero water building 99 out of 100 years, potentially. We said we can handle going to 93 out of 100 years of net zero, or 93% of capacity for another $60,000 in savings. And then there were a whole bunch of smaller cost savings along the way that you can look at in the packet that were another $600,000 when you added them all up. So that's how we got to our $3.5 million in value engineering savings. This was also included in your packet, and this is an important slide. And I want to go through this in a little bit of detail. This is the actual project budget worksheet that gets voted by the building committee and submitted to MSBA. Once we vote the project budget and we submit this SD, that means that our project budget cannot go over that. So that this is a maximum project budget. During the design development process, if we seek additional ways to save money, we can always choose to bring the budget down and save money. We just can't go up. That's an important element for you and our community to understand. So our total gross square footage, it's designed for 990 students. The total gross square footage is 174,759 square feet. That includes everything from classroom spaces to office spaces to corridors and restrooms. That's the entire inside of the building. Total project budget, excluding our contingencies, was actually $114 million. We had scope of items excluded or ineligible is $36,568,000. All right, and I'm going to come back to that number and talk about that in a little bit more detail so you understand how we got there, because that's a big number. Third-party funding, we don't have any third-party funding that would reduce our reimbursement from the state. So what happens is if you take, it's line 119, which is the total project budget excluding contingencies, and take out the $36 million that's excluded, that leaves with the basis of the facilities grant being $77,700,000 and change. Our reimbursement rate is still 49.7%. That is our reimbursement rate from the state. But our reimbursement at 49.7% is on the $77,700,000. All right, it's important because we hear about all the different reimbursement rates that can start to get thrown around. Essentially, the only real reimbursement rate is still the 49%, but everyone tends to want to calculate their own based on, well, how much does it really cost? But our official reimbursement rate is 49.7. I just want to keep driving that home. 49.7 of 77 million is the 38,600,000. All right, and that is the maximum total facilities grant. MSBA will go through an auditing process as the building's being built and after the building is being built to make sure that as we construct it, it still falls within their guidelines, and they can choose to adjust it. But right now, that's what our estimated max total facilities grant is 38,600,000. Now, that doesn't become official until MSBA votes it on October 30th. So that's the important date, and that's why I wanted to make sure you were aware of that several times through the meeting. Cost recovery doesn't apply to us because there is no cost recovery yet. Estimated maximum facilities grant stays at the $38 million. The only area that I think we project could have some cost recovery, that's typically if MSBA has partnered with you on a previous project, like the Douglas roof. So I think there will be a number in that cost recovery. If they've previously funded a project like the Douglas roof, they essentially amortize that over the life cycle of the roof, and they will say, all right, if we gave you, $100,000 for a roof 10 years ago, then we're going to recover some percentage of that grant that we gave you. So that would come in that cost recovery column. Then we have a series of contingencies. I talked a little bit about these before. This is the kind of our insurance policy, that if something in construction has a cost overrun, we are protected against that, and we're not going back to the community. But there's a construction contingency of $2.3 million, $2.4 million almost. Ineligible construction contingency, so in other words, what won't MSBA reimburse out of that construction contingency is about $1.4 million. The eligible construction contingency then becomes $950,000. That is eligible for reimbursement. Owner's contingency is $1.1. That is not, we don't have any of that. That's ineligible. But MSBA, if we submit change orders through the process, they'll review those to determine whether or not they want to reimburse them. So we have to be careful with what we change. And then we have, potentially eligible. These are just, again, calculations. Again, the reimbursement rate of all of it is 49.7, and that becomes the maximum feasibility grant of $39.5 million. So our total project budget totaled up, again, it's the $117.8. And that's where we stand right now. That's the number voted by the building committee on August 28th as its final budget moving forward. Just to recap, total project budget including contingencies, $117.8. We have already paid $1.3 million of that. $1.3 million of that total number was for the feasibility study. MSBA requires us to include the feasibility study in the total cost so that the entire community knows what the total cost of this project was. We have, after the feasibility study, we will have $116.5 remaining on this project. And that's where we stand right now. Our maximum facilities grant is $39.6, which ends up being about 34% of the project, and that's where Michael's question came from before. And the school district share for combined towns is $76.8 million. And that's how we get to that district share. And our OPM reviewed this for me to make sure we were accurate and put in the note that the share figures are approximate and determined by the MSBA audit process. And that's what I talked about before, that they audit this project as it's progressing. So what is reimbursable in this project? 98% of all of our planned spaces within this building are estimated to be reimbursable. So of the 174,000 square feet and change, 171,392 are currently estimated to be reimbursable. That has to be confirmed by MSBA, and that's what October 30th does. Site costs up to 8%, and it's not the total project budget, it's actually the direct building costs. So I apologize for that error, we'll correct it before we post it. But site costs up to 8% of direct building costs are also reimbursable. Furniture, fixtures, and equipment up to $1,200 per student for 990 students. That doesn't include our preschool kids, are reimbursable. And technology costs for up to $1,200 per student for 990 students are also reimbursable. What's not reimbursable, and I'll go to some more details, but just to give you the big picture examples, total cost of construction at MSBA is capped at $333 per square feet. There's not a project being done right now that can come near to $333 a square feet. It's not a realistic number. It has not kept up with the cost of construction inflation. That's going to be a big number. That's why it's in italics, and I'll show you that on the next slide. Space allocation beyond MSBA guidelines. I told you we had some administrative spaces. We'll talk about that a little bit more. We're estimating it's about 3,300 square feet that's beyond the MSBA guidelines, and again, that's compared to the 171,000 that is within their guidelines. Site costs that exceed 8% of the direct building costs, and again, we'll correct that typo there. Some construction contingencies, insurances, and bonding process, those are not also reimbursable by the state. Asbestos abatement does not get reimbursed by the state. And then anything that we determine for our furniture, fixtures, and equipment and student technology that's beyond $1,200 per student, for 990 students, it would not be reimbursed by the state either. So, what does that mean for us? If you remember, and I'll put you to the bottom line first, the ineligible costs for this building were $36.5 million in rough numbers. Now I'll go through how we got there. The biggest number is $29 million of this project, roughly, is due to the MSBA's construction cap at $333 per square foot. The actual costs, building costs for this project are around $505 per square foot for building, the building itself. That leaves a delta of about $212 a square foot. At 175,000 square feet, that up to almost $29 million. That is the single biggest chunk of ineligible costs, and there's nothing we can do about that because it's a hard cap from MSBA. The second piece of ineligible costs are any of our site costs that exceed 8% of the direct building costs. That totaled $2.9 million. And again, we have some additional costs that other schools may not have. The biggest thing is typically demolition of buildings is included in site costs. Many districts, when they build a new school, they're demolishing one building in its place. We have to demolish two buildings after these projects are over because we need the space for parking and ball fields on the Douglas site. So there's additional costs built into demolition and site work that we can't avoid. Space exceeding MSBA guidelines, that is about 3,000 square feet. That is 1.8 million roughly of the budget. Miscellaneous contingencies, bonds, and insurances that the state won't cover, that came to 1.2 million. Asbestos abatement on this project was $500,000. That is not eligible for reimbursement. And then for the next two line items, we asked our project manager and architect to do analysis of all of the current building projects going on around the state and what districts were budgeting for furniture and technology. And there's not really any projects right now where that the $1,200 per student is sufficient. We also know that a challenge that we have that many others have is we're also building the preschool with it. And there's savings that come with that, but there's also costs, and those students can't sit on the floor with nothing to do. So we actually we ended up budgeting. The analysis showed us that districts were budgeting up to, I think it was $1,800 per student for both furniture and technology. And that was kind of the high end of where people were going. We weren't comfortable going to the high end, but we couldn't do the project for $1,200, so we settled on $1,500 with the building committee. However, we don't have 900, our project design is for 990 students, but we actually have 1,150 students who will occupy and use this building on a daily basis. So we budgeted $1,500 per student in both categories for the 1,150, and that's where you get these ineligible costs of roughly $500,000 each, and that totals the $36.5 million. So I just wanted to break that down so there was a clear understanding of where those numbers came from, and all of these were lengthy discussions with the community group of the building committee to make sure that there was consensus among members of both towns for how we arrived at this. I want to give you a sense of comparisons to existing projects that are going on around the state. There's a link at the bottom of this that you can see, the info, massschoolbuildings.org. It's a clickable link in the presentation that we'll post, so if you want to go, this is actually an interactive chart, and you can click on any one of these dots and see what the actual cost per square foot for any project was. This, at the beginning of it, you can't see it, but this dates back to, I believe, 2009, 2010, when MSBA first came into existence from the old State Building Authority, and it's every project that they've funded since. If you notice that, see that green line that just recently starts to step up? That is their reimbursement rate per square foot. Every dot above that represents an actual project cost per square foot. So we are not the only community that's experiencing this, but we're impacted by it. Each of the kind of rectangular boxes represents one of their fiscal years. And so you can kind of see by fiscal year what the escalating cost of construction is. If you do a line of best fit through that for all of you algebra fans, you'll notice it's not linear in terms of actual construction costs. Over the last 2 years, you start to see it almost escalate exponentially on a curve. So that's something that we've been dealing with as we've gone through this project. The purple squares represent projects that haven't been finished yet, but have been finalized and authorized by MSBA. The blue pluses represent projects that are in the MSBA pipeline awaiting final approval. You can see I pointed to our little blue plus. The original cost estimates that we got way back in April, even before we started the schematic design, had us at $556 a square foot. Through all of the processes of value engineering, we're now more in line with that blue, the purple square below, and we're more with the median group of schools being currently built. We're not the lowest, we're not the highest, we're pretty close to that middle of the pack. There's an obvious question that I think gets sparked by this. Why are we in the middle and not kind of on the low end of this? I think, A, there's values of the community. 2, I talked about, and some of the expectations for educational spaces. 2, I talked a little bit about the fact that we are building a unique building. MSB doesn't really do twin schools. That's not something that they're familiar with. We had to do a lot of work to convince them that this was the right option because it's what our community wanted. So there were some costs associated with that. And then I'll talk in a minute about some of the net zero work that we're doing, because that was a real clear point of discussion with the building committee, because there are costs to net zero. Before I do that, though, I just want to talk about why do we have space that's over the guidelines. There's about 150 square feet of gym storage. We actually felt that, physical education teachers, they actually need storage in the gym for things like balls, hoops, all that stuff, cones. We needed a storage space. There's 150 square foot storage space. That's not a big area. Administration made up the bulk of that. What I will say, MSBA guidelines for an individual school exceed what we've given to any of those 3 schools. So each of our school offices individually is smaller than what MSBA would allot for a standard school. And I think that's important. We did shrink our administration spaces on a school-by-school basis, but overall, it still ends up being over their guidelines. And then finally, we know in our educational program, we need math, reading, English language rooms in this building. We have to have them. We can't negotiate that out, because if we don't have them, we can't offer education the way we need to offer it here. That added up to about 1,900 square feet. We actually believe that that's going to be reimbursable because it's so closely tied to the educational program, but we also reduced one of our general education classrooms. The way it worked out, we could have built 37 general education classrooms. 37 doesn't divide well between 2 schools equally, so what we did is we actually divided some of that space up to make sure that we had space allocated for math, reading, and English language rooms, but we did need those programmed. We think we have a strong case with MSBA for reimbursement, but I want to make sure that people know that's on the horizon. Cost of net zero. This is another question that comes up often. So there are 3 main components to achieving a net zero school. There's net zero energy, net zero water, and net zero waste. Net zero energy, the cost of that is a premium of roughly $3.27 million. All right, that is a premium. There were less expensive options. The building committee talked about this at length. Ultimately, the overwhelming majority of the building committee members felt that to design a school in the next century, we needed to commit to having that environmental impact and wanted to pursue that option, and that was a premium that the committee accepted. We did go with a hybrid system rather than a full geothermal system, which we actually believe is going to be a better system for kids and for teachers, but it also saved us a couple $300,000 in the process. It says 240 here, but there's cost escalation built in between now and construction time that makes it come to 300. Net zero water, the cost was $415,000 to go net zero water. That's essentially rainwater harvesting, which allows us, rather than bringing in water off the street to flush all of the toilets in the building, we'll actually be harvesting rainwater and reusing that water. So we have less of an impact on water, and we know water is going to be a sustainability issue into the future. And then finally, net zero waste. This is actually something that pretty much every construction manager and contractor now does anyway is they recycle all of the building materials. It's actually less expensive for them, so there's no additional cost that we take on for the net zero waste during the construction process. All of that totals about $3.7 million. Looking at the analysis our debt strategy subcommittee has done, we plugged in that $3.7 million into the spreadsheets the debt strategy committee has been working on, and that's an impact to go to net zero of about $16 to $24 a year per household for the average single-family home. When the committee looked at that, they just felt like that was the right thing to do based on that type of an impact to the overall budget. But when we come back to this and we wonder why our project is higher than that median, that's one of the driving reasons. This is kind of our updated cost comparisons, because we also want to start sharing this with the community. This now has one column that shows what we originally projected, the second column showing the new projections. So we've overall reduced the total scope of the budget by a few $1 million, which is good. That's a positive. Total project cost remaining after feasibility, that was not something we were measuring early on. MSBA reimbursement, we're slightly under the low end of that, as we heard mentioned earlier. We are 1% lower than the low element that we anticipated from the reimbursement. And then our total share is right in the middle of what we had anticipated when we first set out some expectations with the community about costs. You can see Acton and Boxborough shares. One thing that we're in a good, solid position on right now, and our debt strategy committee is working on this, we're seeing historically low interest rates for borrowing, and that's actually driving down what the taxpayer impact will be. So there's several different models being discussed. That's not finalized. That's going to be coming to you as a recommendation from that committee within the next meeting or two, so you'll hear more about the details of it. But from where that committee's at now, we feel comfortable saying that we've gone from a tax impact in Acton between $650 to $850 a year down to $450 to $600 a year, and in Boxborough from $450 to $600 a year down to $300 a year to $450 a year. And that's kind of currently the big picture financials of where we're at in the project. This is just a visual version of essentially what Larry kind of already went over. We obviously are coming up to important dates in December. And then pending successful approval of the project, we would go into design development. We would actually anticipate breaking ground on the early part of that package in probably June, late June of this year. As soon as kids walk out the door at gates, we'll be digging in the ground. The first step is to put in a septic system. One of the decision points that remains is whether to hook up to the sewer project that Acton is working on. I didn't plan to go into it. If you have questions, I have more info on that, but that wasn't my intent to really talk about that yet tonight. And then, we'll start construction right away. And go from there. So with that said, I'm happy to take questions, but we wanted to get this information out for our community, and then we will have all of this posted. If you go to the district website and you want more information, just click on the building project icon and you can get to a wealth of information. So I'm happy to take questions now on the financial side of this. And I apologize, I know it's a dry presentation, but I thought it was important.
I thought it was a great presentation, and it really laid things out clearly. Thank you. Clearly, a lot of work went into it, and there were lots of data points to look at. I wonder if we thought about, I know this wouldn't be a quick exercise, but the exercise of estimating what 3 disparate buildings would cost us, meaning a preschool and 2 schools, with some of the features that we've stated as are important to us as a community, like the, net zero and gym. And I just think nowhere in there can you sort of see all the inherent savings that would probably be very striking if you quickly did a building with that much glass and landscape, hardscaping, landscaping, softscaping, like a gym, parking, geothermal, it would, I just wonder if that is even feasible.
There's a lot of factors that would have to go into that analysis that probably anyone could find one of them that they could probably question. I think that's the challenge of that. If we know Douglas individually was going to be 99 million, then Gates probably, I think Gates enrollment probably would have been smaller than Douglas's when it plays out after a period of time, so maybe 80-ish to replace a building for a single school. That's what I think people are seeing, roughly 80, somewhere in that range. For a smaller school at least. And then preschool, we actually did an analysis when we were considering whether or not to include the preschool. We started to look at some other options. And I think on the very, very low end for like a modular prefab building might have been around 6 to 7 million. And on the upper end, we were thinking 12, 13, something if we tried to connect it. But if it was its standalone, now you're talking it's its own school. So there's just a lot of factors, but it's a big number is kind of where I ended.
You might also mention preschool is not reimbursable if it's not part of an elementary school. So the MSBA does not consider that part of their program if it's just a standalone preschool.
That's a great point.
Might not make it into MSBA.
Right, and that, I think the other piece of this for us was saving the time. If we tried to pursue Gates, we know MSBA will not really look at another project while you already have a project in the pipeline and through the entire construction and auditing process. So you'd probably be looking at 7 to 10 years just to start Gates. And then you'd have to figure out Conant 7 to 10 years later, and then you'd have to work, so there were a lot of factors that I think drove the committee decision to combine these.
So Peter, you talked about the premium we pay for some of the net zero and energy, but are those, have we looked at operating costs and whether there's savings there or potential payback? Or?
Yeah, there was a life cycle analysis done that's available on the building project website. It looks like this. No, I didn't anticipate that question, though. There was a life cycle analysis. In all honesty, there were multiple systems that, for various reasons, they can save money over kind of a standard what would go into a building. There was a system with boilers and chillers that used gas combustion that also produced a high return on investment over the life cycle of that. But it had combustion. It would have increased our EUI, which is the energy efficiency measure, by something about 10. Which is pretty significant, and it would have jeopardized our ability to be a net zero program. It was less expensive, in all honesty, over its life cycle, but it didn't meet the goals that I think the committee had for pursuing a net zero project. It's 1 in, I think 2 is the one, the boilers and chillers. You can't see the numbers, but
making sure this was updated. So we originally did this with our engineers. There was an update to this hybrid system, as we started to call it. And really what we're doing there is, on the very coldest days of the year, as Peter was mentioning, we have these electric boilers that can kick in and heat the water up to keep the building temperature. And so that's a relatively short amount of days that we would be looking at. The initial analysis, some of these numbers have to be rejiggered because we're getting new estimates in quite quickly, but more or less we're saying about a 20-year payback on a full geothermal system, which is option number 1. And the hybrid system, because we save some dollars up front, we were saying was about a 15-year payback. Again, these numbers have to be adjusted. There's a lot of assumptions, looking at what's the cost of energy and so forth. Sort of ratchets it all back to today. So again, that's what their rough numbers are.
yeah, and like one of the factors that went in, like gas right now, is at historic low prices. So that drives down the cost of operating gas, whereas electricity, that can be volatile, but we will actually end up producing we will be producing the electricity needed to power this building on site through the PV panels.
I still have the question about this effective reimbursement rate. 34%, 1% shine from the lower end of the range that guidance we gave about maybe a couple of years ago, right? So my question is that what was the surprise to you, to the school building committee, that dragged this down, made that shine? Now, I would say that, I was expecting that we will reach like, average 40%, and it was not there, 1% shine. So what was the surprise?
The top number on this chart, which was the cost per square foot cap. What was the surprise? No, I think you said what was the surprise, right? Like what was the surprise that came up?
Well, I read that number. I know that $29 million, that's the biggest one, right? But the things that, if you look at the total square footage, additional square footage, and also you look at, the per square footage that, 505, much higher than the $333, that cap. So I want to understand, like any space that we could lower that square footage, that cost. Because, give me 1 second. So it's given for a $100 million project, 1% reimbursement rate means $1 million. That basically means that we could use that to cover what the full day, all day K. We could also help, a lot into our mental health problems. So, and I just want to understand if anything we could get it done to lower this, the cost.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think the committee worked really hard to lower it, even before we got the cost estimates, by reducing administrative offices, because we knew we were going to be over on administration spaces because we were combining 3 schools. So we did our best to reduce it to minimize that overage. But there's a couple things you need to understand. That graphic where it shows the 333 reimbursement rate, that fairly flat green line, versus the actual costs, and it, like Peter said, it's not linear, it's going up rapidly. That's the cost of construction. And another point you have to understand, when we do a municipal project, we are required by law to use prevailing wages. And that's a wonderful thing. We're paying fair wages for construction, but it makes construction cost more. And even in a recession, prevailing wages never go down. They only stay level or they go up. So what you might do in your homes for construction, the rate that you're paying is quite different than municipalities pay because of prevailing wage. And so that $29 million is not extravagance in our school building. It is a fact of what's going on in the field. Skanska told us that the effective rate, as you're talking about, that 34%, would come up much lower than our actual rate, and that's why we gave that range. And the reason we're falling, and we're only falling 1 percentage point out, and I understand that's a lot of dollars, but it's because it's not a linear number, so that we couldn't project it as easily because it's going up so sharply.
2 quick things I'll add to that. I actually took a look at a couple of the projects that were coming in on the low side of the blue pluses, essentially, some of the current projects in the pipeline. One of them happened to be in Springfield, because it was coming in at a lower cost per square foot. I talked to our project manager about it, and one of the unique features of that building is they actually are taking all the students out of the school that exists now, redeploying them to every other school that they have in the district during construction. Then they're tearing that school down, but because they're building it on kind of the existing site that's already suitable to build a school on, they have dramatically reduced site costs associated with that project that's driving down their costs below what that kind of median range is. So there's unique features to each building. What we did find, the other point I'll make, that was a challenge for us, when we reduced $3.5 million in value engineering, I believe it was, when I looked at the original projections, and I wish I had the slide with me, but I don't, in early August, I think we were at 33 point something 100% reimbursement. We then cut $3.5 million worth of items from the project, and we only moved that needle 1%, because it's not a clear 1% of the total cost. It has to do with how MSBA calculates the various items that you're cutting and how you reduce that total cost. So it wasn't, we really tried to move that, but I think what we got to at the end of $3.5 million is, if we continue to try and reduce the costs, we're going to end up with a building that when we get into, we're going to feel as though we cut some corners and didn't build the building that really is designed for the next 50 years. And that, I think, was our challenge as we talked it through with the building committee, that there is a tipping point that you don't want to pass. I think one of the things we've heard from people that who live in the Parker Damon building is that was built relatively inexpensive, but we actually used that as a model for areas that we didn't want to try and replicate some features of. So there was just a tipping point, I think, that the committee came to, and you can certainly talk to other members of the building committee as well. Everyone has their own feelings about it, but that was where we settled. But I appreciate where you're coming from, because I think that number's on a lot of people's minds.
One more comment, too. You know, in the end, the school committee is going to need to vote this project for town meeting and their recommendation. And I personally really want your support. And I think one thing you need to understand is it is frustrating that we're at just outside of the low range of what we were hoping for. And it is a $1 million impact. But if we don't pass this, we risk losing the $39 million that MSBA is giving us to do this project. MSBA, we have a time limit and when we can get the necessary approvals, and that's the end of February 2020. And so if we don't get it, we fall out of the pipeline, and we still need to do something about the Douglas School immediately and the Gates School in the near term, and we risk then doing that without the MSBA partnership and their $39 million.
So I would urge the building committee to do it right and not get caught up too much in trying to save pennies here, because as Mary points out, at risk is the 30 some odd $1 million from the MSBA. So let's keep that in mind. I want to focus on the range that Michael was bringing up, the 35% to 45%, but I want to look at the other end of it, because I saw a number that was like 49%, and I'd like to understand why the 49% is higher than the 45% that we were
Sure.
talking about.
So MSBA originally gave us a reimbursement rate of about 45%, or it was 45%. At the end of the preferred schematic report and that submittal, MSBA then relooks at your project goals as well as some other factors. And there were two factors that drove up our reimbursement rate. One was around our green initiatives on the building. We received an additional 2 points for green initiatives, which is the maximum you can receive. And so those were bonus points. And then we also received 1.75 bonus points for capital planning and maintenance of facilities. They say they give up to 2, but from what I hear is pretty much 1.75 is their effective cap. So we did receive 3.75 additional bonus points at the end of the PSR submittal before we proceeded to SD, and that helped drive that up. And then, of course, some of the costs I detailed impacted negatively.
So we're gonna have new buildings for 3 schools. So for the maintenance in the future, that I don't know how much savings we ever estimate how much saving we will be able to save in terms of building maintenance, because those are the things that for the town budget wise, that it's a saving in the future than we're just spending now, and versus that we're gonna be able to save a lot in the future. Do we have some ideas on, in terms of maintenance, because we're talking about 3 school maintenance?
Right. I think I would be cautious there only because I don't want us to fall in the pattern that we were in for a decade where we weren't putting enough into capital planning. we've really been thoughtful about our capital planning proposal that came forward to increase our spending on capital so that when we do open this facility, we're budgeting for the cost of maintaining a new building too. There are some day-to-day operational things that will certainly save money in terms of we don't have to fix little things that break in the new school, but we also didn't include Douglas or Gates or the preschool really in our capital plan intentionally because we knew they had this, so I think it would be hard to come up with a hard number. But certainly if we didn't do this project, we'd have to figure that out.
So I know you did this in Franklin, but your grasp, and the breadth and depth of the detail knowledge you have of this project is very impressive. I just wanted to say that. I have a few just two detail questions.
Sure.
But first, to your point, Maya, it is helpful to know what it would cost. But just even knowing that the Douglas School would cost $99 million helps very much with that, with your points. Just knowing that one data point it's helpful. So my questions are this. The reduced construction contingency and owner's contingencies for change orders and such, whether it's adding things from the owner's perspective or errors or change orders or whatever results in a cost there. So those were lowered, I'm assuming because we took on the expense of hiring a project manager at risk or something like this?
So, yeah, there's a process called construction manager at risk, and we actually just got the notice from the state of our opportunity to proceed now in hiring that organization, so we'll be posting that soon. That construction manager will also carry contingencies in their own budget and in their proposal, so we already, I forget, I don't have it on a slide here, the actual number of contingencies. I still think we're carrying $4+ million in contingencies on our budget, and then the construction manager will also have contingencies within theirs. Is that accurate, Larry?
Yeah, there's a couple of layers. Excuse me, there's a couple of layers of contingency that happen at this stage of a project. One is called design contingency. That essentially is putting money. So as Peter mentioned, we had two estimators go through and essentially count all the things they could. Those estimates are about 30 pages each of really fine point text. Because we're in this preliminary part of the project, we don't know what we don't know yet. And so there's something called a design contingency, which at this stage we have agreed to carry 10%, I believe was the number. Which essentially is money that we're not sure yet, we can't point to drawings and find, but nevertheless gives us a sense of, okay, there's some money there for things we don't know and we'll find in the next two phases of our work. So that's one. There's an escalation contingency, essentially saying between now and when midpoint of construction, which is what folks use for in the construction industry, that's a second contingency. Essentially you're putting money aside for that. Peter mentioned the contractor's contingency is a funny one. So at the end of our documents, our design contingency goes down to zero because essentially everything's drawn. Escalation should go down to zero when we bid the job. The contractor carries some amount of money in case there's a little gap between when he buys something from one subcontractor and something from another subcontractor, and there might be a little gap in there that during the course of construction you discover and they spend some money there. That is money that is set aside, as Peter mentioned. That is money that the district controls the spending of that. Essentially you get to approve the spending, so it's not just money the contractor sticks in their pocket. And if there's money left over at the end of that process, it goes back to the district. It doesn't go in the contractor's pocket. Needless to say, they want to spend more of that and you want to spend less. But that's the excitement we get. The construction change contingency, which is sitting now on your side of the ledger, is, as Peter mentions, things like we find during excavation, there's something, boulders we have to deal with. That's money that gets put into it from that So that contingency is in there. I will say that doesn't pay for omissions. We have insurance that pays for some of that. We try really hard not to pay for any of that because we don't want omissions or errors. Just saying. And then finally, there's the project contingency, which again is on top of all of that, which essentially says for whatever comes up, whether it's soft costs or construction costs, you have some money set aside. So there's multiple layers of that. I think the original budgeting we did, Skanska in particular felt, based on their experience, we were being overly generous with those couple of those line items, so they recommended reducing those. So that's hopefully gives you a little detail on that.
And then one last thing. So you mentioned the hybrid geothermal has kind of like an electric boiler associated with it, or series of boilers. So this may be a dead project, but we did get a grant from the state for the battery-operated storage system that has been held up for reasons outside of our control, but it was supposed to go to the high school. But this seems like a nice setup to use that to store some energy so that we could use it instead of, paying for it using electric boilers in the height of the winter.
So that's a good opportunity to touch on this. So there's actually, JD is already planning for battery storage on this site through the contract for this. We aren't paying for the actual PV panels that go in this building. That is on the building or in the parking lot. That actually will be done through a power purchase agreement, which you've already seen those, and JD has proposed those through the operations department, where essentially an outside vendor is contracting with us. We'll make sure the parking lot and roof are PV panel ready, but they'll actually assume the cost of installing them, and in exchange, we're buying power back from them, but at a significantly reduced rate. So that comes with the battery packs already on site to be able to store, and that will be something that we can dip into when we have those few days where we're using the electric boilers. So that's a great point.
I wanted to time contextualize this project a little bit. In the mid-'60s, the citizens of Acton approved and built two schools, the Douglas School in 1965 and the Gates School in 1967. If this project comes to pass, Douglas School will be 57 years old and Gates School will be 55 years old when those buildings are retired. What that means is that, as we look at this building potentially being occupied in 2022, if we do this correctly, we will be supporting education in Acton and Boxborough until about 2080. So, although there's a lot of discussion about what's happening today, everybody should see that what we're talking about is the past 5 decades and the next 5 decades. In that context, I think there's always lots of questions. Why did this happen at this moment in time? But I think, if you look back at it, it's come to pass, at a time when we needed to act. We found a good mechanism by which we can act. And absolutely, we should act to support those next 50 years of education.
Okay, so we are almost an hour behind where we were going to be. So any further questions you have, I'm sure Peter's always willing to answer by email or anything else.
Yep.
I think that clarified hopefully lots and lots and lots of things.
And that's why we paused after the architecture, because we knew that once the numbers came up. So thank you, Larry.
Sure. Thank you, Larry, and thank you, Mary, for coming back. All right, Marie, you're up.
Hi, everybody. In your packet, you have our new staffing report, which shows you our new hires for the school year. We had another big class this year. We've hired 47 new educators. We have 2 more to go when we're meeting tomorrow, we hope. So 49 new educators. We had 54 last year, so just last September, this September reflects a 20% turnover in our teaching force. There's a lot of information in your packet, including a brief bio of all of the teachers, which I hope you enjoyed reading. And we budget M3, which is a teacher with a master's degree and 3 years of experience. And we budget for everybody who we know is leaving and all the positions we know we have to hire for as of the budget season, December, January. We do have some teachers who tell us they're going to leave after that. So for those teachers, their full salary was in the budget. So the new teachers reflected a savings in salaries, if you will. So the average new hire is $64,163, which is about an M5 or M6 in that range. But it does fit within our budget because of some of the other turnover. So right now, the salary budget for the teachers is $75,000 to the good. So that's good for this time of year. We'll have other teachers who will go out on leave unpaid that we don't know about yet for various reasons. And so that number is likely to go up over the course of the year. There's some history in there of turnover in terms of retirements, leaves of absence, people leaving for family reasons and those kinds of things. And we're pretty proud to say that, as you know, we set a goal of increasing our educators of color in our teaching force, and we're hoping to do that by 20% in 3 years, I think we said. And we hired 6 new educators of color. The numbers are still low for us, but that's actually a 45% increase in just this 1 year. So happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Marie. As we think about the next budget season, do you feel like we need to up the average salary? Okay, so you think we should move from an M3 to an M5 in terms of budgeting for new hires?
It's a good question. I mean, new hires are coming in around M5, M6. That's been consistent the last several years. But I think because we know that we will have some people leave after the budget season, I think we're okay with M3. I will also remind you that we did put a vacancy factor in the budget, so we actually expect that there will be more turnover and some unpaid staff. So we've put a negative salary number in the budget. I think it was $225 this year, $225,000, $250, somewhere in there, maybe $250. And so, but we've had positive balances for salaries at the end of the year, so we're trying to get it closer and closer to have a little contingency, but be closer to even. So we're feeling okay about it. Amy, good question. I don't think we need to raise it from M3.
Yeah, it's when I read this data, it's really good, but I do have a question. So does it mean that, we're hiring more experienced teachers than what we thought or what we planned before?
No, not really. Like I said, we've averaged M5, M6 over the years. We're budgeting M3, but we know we're going to have savings in other areas. So no, we're not hiring more experience than we expected. But we are fortunate that we're able to hire at sort of all levels of experience. You can see that in the chart of new teachers. It's good to have a variety in our hiring, and we have the privilege to be able to hire kind of the best people we can bring in to the pool.
Thank you, Maria. I actually have a question. I noticed that 10 of the new hires are special educators, and I'm wondering, is that completely reflective of replacement, or is that because of positions we added? I don't really recall from our budget season how many addition. I know that we had talked about some of the junior high, but that seems like that's 20% of the teachers we hired.
Yep, it's not new positions this year. So it's reflecting replacements and retirements. This has been a phenomenon the last few years. We have had more turnover in special educators than regular educators. We sometimes have a couple going into the classroom, going from special ed to regular ed. We've had a couple of those each year. But we have hired 10 to 12 special educators each of the last 3 or 4 years. And it's not a pool of teachers that's easy to find. It is a high needs area for teachers.
Okay, then we will move on. Thank you, Marie. That was very helpful. All right, so now we're going to move into the new business of the school committee. We have to approve a change of members. You may recall on one of our prior agendas that we decided that the school committee needs to approve the change of members of the other post-employment benefits trust fund board of advisors. So the school committee is required to vote on that. So we need a motion to approve the following members of the OPEB Trust Fund Board of Advisors for fiscal year 20: Dave Verdolino, Steve Noon, Gary Kushner, and Tessa McKinley. Do I hear a motion? Yeah. Thanks, Paul. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion has passed unanimously. So next we have the student activities accounts report. Dave, is there an explanation? Sorry, I'm not behind in my packet. Do you need to speak to it? Yes?
I can, just a real brief overview. It's a one-page memo that you have in your packet. I gave a couple of paragraphs of background just for those who are totally unfamiliar. I don't think anyone is completely unfamiliar, but just some background about the schools that are involved, the enabling legislation, and some of the process by which the student activity funds are overseen. It's the school committee policy, which annually votes to establish or change the maximum balance that the checking accounts can have, and also to reauthorize the list of officially recognized clubs and other activities. And I've given you some suggested wording for a combined vote or separate votes, but the way I worded it is as a single vote.
Oh, I was going to make a motion. So then we can discuss. Okay. All right. Move to approve the lists of proposed student activities funds for Blanchard Elementary School, R.J. Gray Junior High School, and Acton Boxborough Regional High School, each as recommended by their respective building principals as the officially recognized student activities for the 2019-2020 school year, and furthermore to set the impressed balances of the student activity checking accounts for the 2019-2020 school year, consistent with the prior year as follows: Regional High School, $35,000, R.J. Gray Junior High School, $25,000, Blanchard Elementary School, $5,000.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have one more of these to do. So we need to approve Don Bentley's title change in the various school committee policies that we have. It's basically just changing the wording from the previous title to the new title. So, what is our motion?
Move to approve the proposed change to Dr. Bentley's title in the 4 policies as proposed.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, that motion passes unanimously. Okay. So, I'm not on the mic. All right, so we need to have a subcommittee update. So I did not hear from very many people after we discussed the subcommittee assignments last time. Nora did volunteer maybe under duress, to be the Boxborough FinCom representative, which is great, thank you, I appreciate that. Paul offered to remain the Acton BOS representative, and Diane had said she would be willing to piggyback with someone or flip-flop with someone if they were willing to do the FinCom representation on the Acton side. So, is there someone that would be willing to do that with Diane? I know, John, you don't want to be an official representative, but you do expect to attend some of those meetings, so.
I do like numbers, and I do expect to attend some of the meetings, but I don't want to be formally committed, but I might be somewhat helpful.
All right. So, Diane, if you're comfortable with that, then does that work out? Okay. So and before I get to the one that we really don't have, the warrant committee is currently, I believe, only.
I can help on that.
You can help on that as well? Okay. And Paul, I was going to say that it was me, Amy, Paul. Diane, do you want to remain on that or no?
I don't even think I'm on it. I think I just go.
Right. I just want to make sure that there's enough names for Rebecca to reach out to when, so can you add, I guess, if Diane's not officially on that, can you add Diane? So it should be me, Amy, Paul, Angie, and Diane. Okay. So the one thing that no one on the Acton side stepped up to do is to be the Minuteman Tech liaison. Angie, I know you did that last year. It is an important liaison position.
Yeah.
Is that something that you would not mind continuing?
Yeah, I don't mind. Yeah.
Okay, excellent, great. Okay, so Angie. So I think then that all of those things are filled. So one of the things I just wanted to say, though, is if for some reason your circumstances change, things happen during the school year, we have kids, we have other responsibilities. If any of your responsibilities become too overwhelming, please, 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 let me know. Don't just, continually miss meetings or whatever. It's okay if other things come up and you need to step back, and we certainly can, juggle and figure out something else. But if that becomes the case, then I absolutely want to know. So I guess then we will have, this list is practically final, which is in your packet, and Beth will add the last couple of names. Okay, so the next three things on the ongoing business are 5.1, 5.2, 5.1.2, 5.1.3, and 5.1.4. So we'll have some updates. So as far as negotiations, the subcommittee met, and as you know, we have an executive session scheduled for Monday night. I sent out ahead of time a link to the teacher's contract, which I would like everybody to read. And Beth, did you bring the hard copies tonight? So Beth has hard copies if you'd like to mark it up with all of your questions and concerns and things like that, so that we're all on the same page when we meet on Monday night. John, would you like to give the update on debt strategy?
The debt subcommittee met August 12th to review various borrowing models. The debt subcommittee is charged with providing two recommendations to the school committee. One recommendation related to the structure of debt issuance, when we should issue the bonds, what the term of the bonds should be, and whether the bonds should be structured as a level principal or as a level payment. And the other recommendation is with respect to what we would project the interest rate to be at the time of bond issuance. The school committee will be able to use these recommendations in conjunction with the amount of borrowing estimated by the building subcommittee to project costs for Acton and Boxborough property owners and the impact on property tax rates. And this is exactly the iterative process that Peter sort of started tonight, showing some new numbers based on the interaction between what has happened in the building subcommittee and what the debt subcommittee has concluded. The sentiment of our last meeting was that the borrowing should be immediate, that the interest rate environment is very favorable right now. And the discussion also favored a 25 or 30-year term. The question of level principal versus level payment is more open, and I request that school committee members who have opinions on level principal versus level premium share them right now, or provide their thoughts to Dave Bertolino prior to the next debt subcommittee meeting on September 19th. I am personally in favor of level principal, as the structure is more favorable for borrowing 10 plus years from now, although it would obviously increase the initial payments. I want to note that the actual structure of the borrowing and the timing of the issuance will be decided by the regional treasurer, Margaret Dennehy, who will rely on both the guidance of the school committee and administration, as well as the underlying discussion in writing the bond prospectus and in accepting bids for the bonds. The 19th.
Paul?
I would also favor level principal as well.
Diane?
I just want to mention that Minuteman Tech spoke at the August 27th FinCom meeting in Acton, and they are doing level payment, and it's a different, it's a different ball of wax there. They have 6 districts, and but I just wanted to mention that if you want to catch that on ActonTV, that might be helpful.
Okay, so there are approved minutes from the debt strategy. Oh, sorry, Dave.
Just wanted to say, John, respectfully, that the debt subcommittee is next going to meet on September 16, and the goal is to make a recommendation for the school committee's next meeting on September 19th.
Thanks. Okay, so there are approved minutes from the debt strategy meeting in your packet. We have budget, but we haven't, as an update, but we haven't met yet, right?
No, our first meeting will be on the 17th, the budget subcommittee.
Great. Okay, but Diane, you are up next, because we have the guidebook update as far as the...
So I received some feedback on the new updated member guidebook, and what I've done. So one of the requests was to make the process by which you make a motion clearer. So I am going to propose adding a. I did that, actually. I adapted something that was online that I thought was very good. It kind of walks you through how to make a motion, every single step. I think it's pretty useful, and I was considering just adding it as an extra addendum to the guidebook. That was pretty much it. So if anyone has any last-minute changes, I'm going to kind of finalize this prior to our next meeting. I don't know that we need to share the guidebook again. It'll be posted, but that was the one change that I was going to implement.
I just want to say thank you, and it's very clear to me. I read that. That's very helpful.
I also think it's a good addition. And I know it's a little unrelated. I like that we have the kind of the cover page on a packet item that indicates whether a vote is needed or wanted or just informational. And I also like that the motion language is included in that. So thank you. Whoever to thank, I thank.
All right, so item 5.3 is the school committee liaison reports. Diane, did you have a report on ALG?
Yeah, ALG met on the 29th of August. There are just like 4 mentionables from the meeting. There was a brief update on reserves from the town of Acton, which is free cash. They are anticipated to reach $3 million, which exceeds their target of $2.6 million, so they're in good shape there. Peter provided an update on the school building project and announced that the budget of $117.5 million, which can go down but not up like our voted budget. And you may recall, as Peter mentioned, and we saw in the slides, that this past spring at town meeting, we floated a range of 120 to 130 million, so that's coming in under that. The big discussion in ALG right now centers around finalizing the details for each of the warrant articles for the upcoming special town meeting that will happen on Tuesday, December 10th. This will be followed by a ballot election a week later on Tuesday, December 17th, and this will happen in both towns. So I just want to say that December 10 and 17 are dates that all school committee members should have in their calendars. There will be several articles on the warrant, one seeking town meeting approval for a debt exclusion for the new school building, of course, and one seeking town meeting approval for a debt exclusion to build a fire station in North Acton. And then ALG discussed whether to add a third article to Acton's warrant regarding a debt exclusion for Acton, the Acton's portion of the debt for the new Minuteman Tech building. So today was the first day of school in Minuteman Tech. There are 36 students from Acton are currently enrolled there. The total enrollment is at 612 and their capacity is 628, proving that if you build it, they will come. If you want to see more on the project, there actually really is a very good presentation that Minuteman Tech did at the most recent, the most recently posted FinCom meeting on the 28th of August. The West Acton Sewer Initiative was briefly discussed at ALG. And finally, get out your calendars again, because we are all invited to attend a tri-board meeting with Acton Board of Selectmen, Acton FinCom, and School Committee. This is tentatively proposed for Tuesday, November 12th, and so I will need to know if that date works for everyone. This will be a dinner which is provided, followed by updates from each board on major projects, and the FinCom typically presents its point of view as well. We've held these in the past several times, and they've been very successful. It's a great chance for the full boards to meet each other and to share information. There's a lot going on in both towns, and of course, good planning requires that boards continue to promote continuous dialogue and collaborate on behalf of taxpayers, which was why ALG was created in the first place. This is a really good opportunity to just meet everyone on the major boards. So just let me know if that date works for you. If you can, do you want to jump in and add anything here?
I would just maybe add one detail to that November 12th is an important date because that's the date that language needs to be finalized for the various initiatives going on in the town of Acton. So when we talked with ALG about selecting that date, we needed the date to be after the October 30th MSBA meeting, but before the language needed to be finalized, or right at when the language needed to be finalized. That was like that opportune time, so it really is a tight window from that standpoint. The other thing I'll say is, I'm presenting at Acton FinCom, a very similar presentation to what you saw tonight. I'm doing that on Monday, but we're also reaching out to the Board of Selectmen in Acton, and then both the FinCom and Boards of Selectmen in Boxborough, and we're going to do similar presentations in Boxborough to the various boards there to make sure that we're very consistent in how we message to both communities and provide the same opportunities in both towns.
John?
I believe that the CUB meeting is on Tuesday.
Tuesday, sorry.
And
Yep.
the nominal start time for the tri-board meeting is?
Gosh. 5:30? Yeah, so I'll just kind of randomly set a deadline. If you could just quickly check your calendars and get back to me maybe by the end of next week. Would that work for everyone? Okay.
And I just want to clarify, it includes Boxborough members too. And the reason I ask for that clarification is because BLF for us really is almost every time a tri-board meeting, so it's a little different. I mean, obviously, our whole school committee does not come to that, but anyway, I just wanted to make sure.
Yes, okay. Boxborough members absolutely invited.
Okay, yeah, John?
I just wanted to make one other comment, sort of aligned with what Peter was talking about and what's been touched on this evening, is there are many sort of critical dates that are coming up over the course of the next 12 weeks. I mean, there's not very much time between this evening and those town meetings and those votes. So I hope that everybody will, in addition to setting time for meetings, set aside time, to reach out to the community to discuss these very important activities.
Okay, I actually don't have a BLF update because we meet next week. So at our next meeting, I will give that update. And Boxborough members, if you aren't in the practice of regularly attending BLF meetings, it's on September 10th. It's held in the library. I think we start usually at 7. Okay. We have warrants to sign tonight. There are 7 warrants on the agenda that I believe was already circulated.
Vendor ordinance 20-003, 20-004 PR, 20-004, 20-005 PR, and 20-005, in the total amount of $5,136,521.52. And payroll warrants P2004 and P2005 in the total amount of $1,247,990.05. There are minutes in your packet from August 6th, 2019, that we need to approve tonight. Any discussion? John?
Yes, I've commented before, but I wanted to comment again tonight that the minutes really represent the activities of the school committee, and as that important record of our activities, I do actually think that they would be better at the beginning of the meeting rather than at the end.
Okay. So we're ready to vote. All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, those pass unanimously. And the last thing on the agenda is the FYI. So in your packet are the back-to-school open house dates, as well as the FY20 school calendar, a list of our meeting dates. Is there anything on that FYI that you want to speak to?
The only thing I'll add, there is an interesting workshop being put on, how trauma impacts children and families. That is on September 17th at 9:30 a.m. We have that flyer in your packet, I believe. That's actually being sponsored by the state, I think, Department of Children and Families, and specifically with the Commission on the Status of Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, so that might be of use to some of our families in the community.
Great. And the dates for the Acton and Boxborough special town meetings were mentioned by Diane, December 10th, 2019. Make sure those are in your calendar. And there is an open meeting law training, if anyone's interested, sponsored by the town of Acton on October 2nd, both at 4:30 and at 6:30 in the Acton Town Hall. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor? All right.